Welcome to our new show on women, wealth, and social change called Women Plus We've Been Waiting For. This is definitely a conversation that includes both men and women, but is really striving to unpack what has not been working in philanthropy and impact investing, and really the tremendous opportunities we have before us to do things in a better and more impactful way. And so today we have two additional wonderful guests, Ben Roble and Meg Massey. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. You know, this is obviously a very big topic, and it's always so difficult to unpack it in a 20-minute conversation. But you know, the both of you are going to make this very easy because you have just released a really powerful book that really speaks to so much of what we're going to hit on today. This is a book called Letting Go: How Philanthropists and Impact Investors Can Do More by Giving Up Control. I loved seeing this book come out because there's so much of what you shared that really resonated also, with my experience as someone that has been raising capital both in the philanthropic and impact investing community. So before we dive into the questions, Ben and Meg, we would love for you to share a little bit more about who you are and your journey in this wonderful ecosystem. And maybe we can start with you, Meg.
Sure. Thank you so much, Alex. It's really great to be here. So I'm a journalist and a strategic communications consultant, and I've been working in the impact investing field writ large for the last 10 years. And one thing that I kept noticing as I progressed in my career, and also as the field of impact investing really started to grow, is that even though capital-wise it was growing, the conversation still felt very, very niche, very clubby, very exclusive. And I really, that was something that I became very passionate about addressing, because the economy affects all of us, and we should all have a say in how capital is spent, shaping our collective futures. So when I connected with Ben back in 2019, and we shared that view, and that was kind of how the impetus for the book was born.
Wonderful. We should all have a say on how capital is used to shape our collective future. That's so great. I couldn't agree more. Ben.
Yeah, and thank you for having us. So my background is in advocacy. I worked at the NAACP as a speechwriter for a few years. And I worked at some think tanks writing reports about criminal justice reform and voting rights, and a lot of progressive issues affect people of color. And then I moved over about 5 years ago to where I currently work, which is Village Capital. We're a nonprofit. We run an accelerator for impact-driven startups. But what makes us unique is that we're sort of both an accelerator and also advocates within the world of tech investing. We run this participatory process where we essentially let groups of entrepreneurs decide who should get our money. And it's supposed to be a counterbalance to the fact that the world of tech investing in Silicon Valley is dominated by men, by white people in certain cities. So the way that this book came about is a few years ago, about 2 years ago at this point, I set out to sort of see who else is doing this work to democratize how entrepreneurship works, to democratize how venture capital decisions are made. And met Meg pretty early on, and also came across the world of participatory grant making early on, which of course is the same conversation, but happening on the foundation side.
Wonderful. And, I know that we are all privileged white people having this conversation today. And I know, Ben, you are part of this new ecosystem, right, where we are talking about the disproportionate leadership of white men. But I think it's so great to have, both you and Meg on this call today, because, I don't think we're going out in the world and saying we want to eradicate the leadership of men, or all white men are not, creating this more balanced ecosystem. We want to work side by side with men and be given that balance in terms of weighing in on critical decisions and so forth. And I think what really struck me, hearing you both speak today and, reading your book is that, you really point to how philanthropy overall is very insular. It is very top down. There are obviously, some great philanthropists out there. So we're not saying it's like this across the board, but in terms of the general themes and approaches, it's still very much under that umbrella. And philanthropic institutions are disproportionately led by white men. So share with us a little bit, what do you think needs to happen to change this dynamic? And how do you see this improving? How philanthropy can really be all that it can be? I can't think of a better expression, but really generate the impact that we hope philanthropy could generate.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And as you said, we know that the vast majority of people in this space they're well-intentioned. They want to do good in the world. I think it's about recognizing the limits of our own expertise and elevating other kinds of expertise. We talk in the book a lot about the value of lived experience, and as well as the value of learned experience. There's experience that you get from, having a degree in something, working in a certain field for 10 years, but there's also experience you get from living in a neighborhood, from being part of a group that's traditionally been marginalized or is, currently being excluded from society in some way. And the value of that experience is often discounted or treated as optional, right? It's treated as like, well, this is a potential for feedback, but not to like concretely co-create something with those with capital who, as you said, are disproportionately white, male from the global north, heterosexual, cisgender, able-bodied, the list goes on. And that can't be the default for how we decide what gets funded or how problems are solved, right? That's one perspective. There's a whole array of other perspectives that need to come into it. And I think the first step for most philanthropists and investors is just recognizing that.
Absolutely. I'm going to share some thoughts, but Ben, over to you.
Yeah, no, I think that you, like Meg was saying, I think that it's not about replacing the voice of people who might come from a liberal arts degree or have a background. And, I think it's one thing that I found interesting. I'm a business school student. I'm getting my MBA, and I was surprised to see that a lot of people who work both in philanthropy, but also for philanthropic consulting firms, which is a bit of a booming cottage industry, do have business degrees. And what I guess I'm saying is there's nothing wrong with someone with a business and analytical degree coming in and saying, let's look at a couple countries in aggregate and look at some challenges around poverty and think about how we can solve those problems. I think there's a lot of value to that analytical side, but it has to be balanced with the voice of people on the ground, with the voice of lived experience. And in our book, we can get into this in the weeds a bit, but in our book, we talk about several specific tangible models and structures that different foundations and investment funds have created to balance those different types of expertise.
That's great, Ben. And I would love for our watchers today to hear more about those models. So would love for you both to dive into that. Right before you do that, I just want to say, what you're saying is so important because, it goes with a theme that we've been discussing with other, people who have come on the show, which is that just because someone is an incredible tech innovator or someone is an outstanding business student, and by all means, please contribute, be part of this ecosystem of wanting to make the world a better place. But it's a very different system if you are now handing over the keys solely to that person and saying, because you created $1 billion business or empire, you now have the keys to tell us how to solve global poverty. And that's really the culture that we've created. It's not, it's not this collaborative partnership. And, from my experience, this goes all the way to why these restricted grants that have 70 KPIs that box organizations in this place where they can't be creative, they can't experiment, they really can't be all that they could be, because we're trying to fit this narrow framework, is a really big problem, and it's been a big barrier. So bringing it back to you, Ben and Meg, so tell us a little bit more about these models that you identified in your book, and what works.
So one example of a model that we really like is the Boston Ujima Fund. And we'll start with maybe an example from the investing side, and then we can give an example from the grant making side. So in Boston, it's a city like many cities across the country that is rapidly gentrifying. There are these neighborhoods, Roxbury and Dorchester, down in the south part of Boston that there's a lot of tech companies coming into Boston, a lot of Whole Foods coming in, and there's a lot of conversation about how folks are getting pushed out and priced out. So this woman, she's the former president of the Boston NAACP. She got fed up with sort of pushing for change to the political process, and she decided we're going to create our own model for economic development in the city of Boston. And Ujima means, I think it means togetherness in Swahili. And this investment fund, they lend to small businesses in this neighborhood, but anyone can put money into this loan fund, and they actually, thanks to some recent changes in Congress, they can take non-accredited investors. So anyone in the neighborhood can invest for as little as $50. You also have institutions and synagogues, and Harvard is also putting money into this fund. So anyone can put money into the fund, but the twist is that only neighborhood residents can vote on who gets money from this fund. And also a nice little addition, anyone who identifies as having been displaced from the neighborhood also has the right to vote. And they just this past year went through a year-long process to make their first investment. They invested in a immigrant-run co-op that is focused on recycling called Cero. And it's been successful, and it's a model that's now being replicated. And it really took a lot of work, to have all regular meetings with community members, and to design the fund collectively, to collectively talk about what are priorities, how should we identify businesses, but ultimately, Nia Evans, who runs the fund, she says, we're getting market research in a way that is invaluable. We're asking folks in the neighborhood, what do you want to see? Which is the kind of thing that developers aren't usually getting. So that's one model. I know that's more on the economic development side. Maybe Meg could provide a philanthropy example.
Yeah, absolutely. So on philanthropy, there's participatory grant making, which has its origins in the 1970s, and basically communities that will be impacted by the funds that the grant is supposed to be helping, they're the ones to make the decision about what gets funded. And there's a number of different models. There's a number of different models that we talk about in the book. One of the really exciting ones is the Disability Rights Fund. And this is a participatory grant maker. They were formed after the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which created a global standard for how people with disabilities need to be included in society. And this woman, Diana Samarasan, who founded the organization, it took them several years to come up with the right model, because the disability community is really diverse. Like, not only are there disabled people in every single country, but there's a wide range of disabilities. Some people are born with them, some acquire them, after an accident or an illness. And getting all those voices in it's a challenge, right? You can't possibly have a room where every single possible type of person under the sun is represented. So what they've created is a grant making committee that is made up 50% of disability rights activists, people with lived experience disability, and they rotate out every few years so that they continue to get new voices in. And representing different parts of the globe, different types of disabilities, different, genders, sexual orientations, what have you. And they are donors to the fund who are included on that. But again, their expertise as funders is balanced with that of people who are on the ground, who know what the needs are in, say, Indonesia. We interviewed a woman named Dwi Ariani, who started an incredible nonprofit there after an earthquake in 2006. And she was able to, once she connected with the Disability Rights Fund, she was able to get funding for her work to address the UN, to get Indonesia to sign on to the UN Convention for Persons with Disabilities. And she was also able to tell them that if they wanted more grant applicants from the island, Indonesia is made up of, hundreds of islands, how to translate it into the different local languages for each of those islands so that they could be sourcing applications from a more diverse space. And the end result was Indonesia ratifying the treaty. So this has real impact, and it makes people, Disability Rights Fund, their headquarters is in Boston, Massachusetts, which, could not be further from Jakarta. So this is there's so much to be gained from bringing in those different voices, and they've come up with a participatory grant making process where they bring people in to review applications, they compensate them for their time, which is really important. And they also have this very iterative process where they ensure ongoing representation of different communities. The process really is the point.
That's so great. And, it's so interesting to hear you both share these different models, because I remember 2008, I had just wrapped up the beginning of my journey at the time with the World Bank. I'd worked in Cambodia. I had seen what development looked like, working within that kind of institution, working with governments. And I remember having this aha moment when I was there at the time, where I was thinking, I'm so much more of an entrepreneur and a diplomat. I really want to find the ecosystem of entrepreneurs who are disrupting traditional aid. And this is when, social entrepreneurship and enterprises were rising. And that was the conversation we were having at the time. And what drew me to working for awater.org was that the entire model was based on something very participatory. It was all about, understanding what are the local demands from people who lack access to water, and how do we think creatively on meeting that demand, knowing that sometimes people are not looking to get a well constructed necessarily in their community. They just want to participate financially to have access to the solutions they want. Years later, that has scaled, but the piece of the puzzle that remains a little bit stuck in the past is how this is channeling and how philanthropists view their role and what they're doing. And again, not saying everybody's not doing it right. And we're trying to figure out what is the right way. But, there are some philanthropists that I worked with that approached our work with the mindset of how can we help? You have this participatory, demand-driven approach baked in what we do. How can we provide capital to scale that and really meet this demand from people living in poverty? And what I hear when I hear the ideas that you're suggesting, Ben and Meg, is you are highlighting how that kind of mindset and culture is now manifesting itself in how capital providers view their work and how they can help support local needs. I think it's amazing. My big question to you is, do you think it's possible for these types of models, this mindset, this culture, to become the norm across all of philanthropy?
We certainly argue that it is possible and that it's necessary. And in the book, and also Edgar Villanueva, who wrote our foreword, calls for in 10 years and however many years, we want to see 50% of decision makers at foundations being people who have direct lived experience of the problem at hand. But we do think that it's actually possible, and that there is actually interest in this. I think on one level, we talk about a moment of reckoning for philanthropy, where folks, just in the past few weeks with the Gates Foundation changes and Mackenzie Scott, there's a lot of soul searching happening at the highest levels of foundations about, what should a foundation be? What should philanthropy do. But then I think what's also really interesting is, as I'm sure your listeners know, we're coming up on the largest wealth transfer in, I believe, history, was something like $80 trillion
Yeah.
coming to the next generation. And while we were working on the book, we spoke with a lot of folks who are millennials and even younger millennials who are part of organizations like Resource Generation, and other coalitions of young people from backgrounds of privilege who are uncomfortable with their wealth, who in some cases believe that they didn't they didn't do anything to deserve this wealth, or in some cases the wealth, if you want to look at it in a certain way, you can look at the history of exploitation that caused some of this wealth, even if it's you're talking about a couple generations back. There's real interest in searching for tangible solutions, and participatory grant making is something that has been, there are these smaller foundations that are testing it out, but there's also larger foundations like Ford Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, Hewlett Foundation, and others around the world that have been piloting to early success. And maybe Meg, you can talk about some of the ways that folks can actually do this.
Yeah, during our research, we identified 3 different decision points that are pretty much analogous between investing and philanthropy, where those who have an investment fund or run a foundation can think about, integrating the voices of people with lived experience, the communities that they're trying to support. The first is setting priorities, or an investment thesis and mission statement. Who is contributing to developing that? Some organizations will set priorities, once every 10 years. Some will do it every few years or every year, or for every fund that they raise. And it's important that the people who are setting, if the interest is in climate change or poverty, whatever that sort of big picture issue is, there needs to be other voices in the room helping to refine it into something that's focused and that meets the needs of that community. The second is building a pipeline in grant making that's sourcing grant applications, and on the investment side, it's identifying potential deals. There's lots of stats, as I'm sure you're familiar with, about how on the venture capital side, if you're a white guy who went to Stanford or Harvard, you're pretty much already getting pitch meetings with leading VCs. Yeah. But if you're anyone else, it's that much harder. And so how do you identify those opportunities that are outside your lived experience? Who are you asking to make warm intros to entrepreneurs? Because if there are other white guys from Harvard or Stanford, you're probably going to get more of the same, versus reaching out to HBCUs, to affiliate networks of women or people of color, and making that just a normal part of your process of bringing in that diversity. And then there's the voting and vetting stage, where decisions are made about who gets the grant, who gets the investment. And on the participatory grant making side, we see this in having members of that community serve on grant making committees or run the whole process themselves. We also see a number of models, including Frida Young Feminist Fund, where it's the other grant applicants who are reviewing. They're doing peer review of applications, and they're reviewing applications from other people working on that issue in their region, and ultimately that decides who gets funding. On the investment side, there's the Olamina Fund, which is based in Oakland, California, and they've created an investment committee that includes people with lived experience. They're investing in financial institutions that serve communities of color, and so they have people who are members of those communities who work for financial institutions or in finance in some way, who are part of that. Again, the idea is not just that this is, a good idea from a moral standpoint, it's also that much more effective. If you're serving this community, they're going to be able to tell you what they need. Your own needs better than somebody else. So so when we talk with funders, we ask them to think about those 3 decision points as, the first place to start, and then go from there.
Wonderful. Ben and Meg, we're up for time, but these are such incredibly valuable insights. I hope everybody reads your book. It's a must read, especially today. I also, I love your sense of optimism and the solutions that you've proposed. I hope that you'll come back soon as we unpack more of this conversation. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.